Good afternoon. Thank you so much for making your way back to the room and helping us to keep us on time. I did get a promise from our chair that he'll be here 20 minutes before the session. So this is about 2 minutes after, but we happen to have another session chair here who is joining us virtually actually. So I don't want it to hold us back because again, if we don't start on time, then we would not finish on time and then it would affect the whole program. So I hope you did enjoy your lunch. And if you don't hear well, you just have to move closer because there's a lot of chairs now. So if you'd like to do that, please. Okay. So put yourself in a comfortable space here, right? Because we're going to be spending another 2 hours together. And by now you might actually started to get to know who you're sitting with and enjoyed a bit of each other's company. Okay. So yeah, don't be shy to join the session, get closer, and we hope that if we start on time and the speakers keep to their time, there should be a lot of opportunity for discussion, and that's what we would like to do. Okay, so please do your best and think really hard about all the good examples that you have to share, and then why are we, what kind of conversation we wanted to have, and this is your space, this is your time. So thank again everybody for joining us, for making the trip. I know that actually I was not able to say a lot of things this morning because we were really running out of time. I'm buying a bit of time for our other chair to show up. So let me just say that there are about 200 participants in person. You would see that in the first session, the room was packed. And this is what you expect, right? Because lunch is good, people are taking their time, but we would have people back in here. So thanks again to those of you who are really good about coming back in time for this. And we also have about 100 people joining virtually. And participants are coming from about 30 countries from around the continent. So that's huge. So thank you again for making the time to be here. In addition, we also have people from outside the continent. So they're coming from, like I myself travel from Canada. We have colleagues from Sweden, Norway, and many other countries, Japan as well, and Thailand, right? Okay, so we are here to talk about what's happening in small-scale fisheries in Africa, but at the same time, you would notice the way we organize the session, at least in the plenary session, is that at least one of the discussants is actually from outside. So we're gonna have that kind of experience sharing and a perspective that we share, which I think is great. So I'm just gonna get things going because Jemimah, you're also chairing these. Hello, can you say something to us so that we make sure we can hear you?
Okay, hello and good morning.
Just a second,
Can
we
you
didn't
hear me?
yet.
Okay.
Where are the team? Can we get the sound from Jemimah? Your microphone is on, I assume?
Yes,
Jemimah?
it's on.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, why don't you just go ahead and introduce the session, and then you are the first presenter. Now, you're not gonna see when I tell you the time, but I would just say something in a microphone, okay? So just keep your time. Is that okay?
Yes, that's
Perfect.
okay.
All right, so if you'd like to just introduce the session and then start your presentation, that would be great. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Good morning to co-chair. Good morning to all the speakers and also to discussants as well as all those participating. We welcome you to this plenary session on Blue Justice, Leaders in Blue Justice. So we want to look at examples from across the African continent about issues that various countries have faced when it comes to achieving fairness and justice, and what have some of these processes been so that we can together dialogue on the best way to move forward in the attainment of blue justice. We are also going to be looking at examples where interventions or measures have been put in place to help drive towards more equity and fairness for small-scale fishers. And because a lot of time is already gone by, I wouldn't want to waste too much time on long stories. So I would say on behalf of my co-chair, Aliou, Sall, that welcome everyone, and we hope we have a fruitful series of deliberations. Thank you very much. Okay. So for this session, we are 4 speakers, myself, Almas, Katrina, and William, and we'll be talking for 15 minutes each. And would ask that you save all your questions, and all those joining us virtually can also type their questions in the chat section, and we will address all of them when the time comes. I think I've just seen Aliou come in, so with his permission, if he has a few words, and then I'll just go straight away and start my presentation. So Co-Chair Aliou, do you have a few words to say?
Thanks a lot, Jemimah. I apologize because I had, a call from Dakar. It was complicated, not complicated, but it was a family call. So welcome to this session on blue justice. We have normally speakers, among whom you have, where is Katrina? Sit down here. Where are the two as the please? So I won't be long because we must remind what Ratana said this morning, that we must be aware about the timing and all. But I wanted just to remind the fact that in order to update you, we take the precaution to upload a glossary concerning blue justice narrative in order to help people who would like to be familiar to it, to be more familiar to it. And as you will realize, throughout the presentation that will be done here, blue justice, I beg your pardon, in case, Jemimah, you point out, this, you did these remarks. Blue justice is a counter narrative to this, well famous nowadays, blue economy concept and the blue growth concept. It's if you see, you have two words, justice and the blue. Justice refer to all these injustices, for example, faced by fishers at sea. Blue refer normally to the sea or the ocean. So as you would like to be very practical, I invite, as you are, I start with one lady. He hasn't yet presented, no? Jemimah, but Jemimah, yes, Jemimah, go ahead. I thought that she anticipated. Anyway, go ahead, and then we'll have you and then. Voilà. Sorry.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Aliou. I would now proceed to share my screen, and then we can start with my presentation. Is my screen visible, please? Hello?
Jemimah,
I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Hello?
Jemimah, can you share your screen, please?
Yes, I'm trying to share it.
Do you see your own screen?
So I'm trying to share it, but
You want us to
just
pay
a
for
minute,
you?
please. Okay, just a minute. I just want to see. Okay, let me try again, please. Okay. All right. Okay. Yes, please, is my screen visible now? All right, so I'll make it very snappy. So for my presentation, we want to look at how fishers' reactions to fisheries management regulations have changed over time, and how we have had justice or injustice issues in Ghana and the steps we've taken towards improving them. So if I could just say something briefly, Ghana has been known historically to be a very mighty fishing nation, and our fishermen in the small scale industry are very well known across West Africa for being very good, especially when it comes to small pelagic fishing. And they undertake both seasonal and semi-permanent migrations, both within Ghana and all along the coast of West Africa. We can find Ghanaian fishers all the way from Gambia down to even Gabon, and sometimes we even hear of people in Angola as well. However, small-scale fisheries in Ghana are very, very gender segregated. So when it comes to capture fisheries or maritime fishing, is dominated by men. And then you have women rather dominating at the post-harvest processing end, where by post-harvest, I'm also talking about fishmongering, among other things. So our women are mostly involved in the trade of the harvested fish, whilst the men actually go out to sea to fish. And Ghana's fishing sector employs about 10% of the country's total workforce. And we have this situation where we are one of the highest per capita consumers of fish in the world, and we currently lead in West Africa. So much that there's so much demand that we cannot keep up, so we even import more fish to augment our supply. So already you can begin to see the amount of pressure that we put on our fishing sector, because we take everything, and it's only the very high value fish like cuttlefish, shrimps, tuna, and high value demersals that we export, but everything else is consumed and we bring in more. And our fishing sector contributes to about 1% of the gross domestic product. Now, we have various fleets, but artisanal or small scale fishery contributes about 55 to 60% of our total fish landings. But that is not to say that we only have small scale fishers or artisanal fishers. We actually have an industrial fleet, which is made up of offshore trawlers who do both bottom and mid-water trawling, which I'll come back to. And we also have vessels that are shrimpers that only target shrimps. We have the tuna vessels also, which usually operates with a pole and line. And then we have our inshore or semi-industrial vessels. So these ones have inboard engines, and they are much smaller, made of wood, and they operate bottom trawls at this time of the year. And because we are a coastal upwelling nation, during the upwelling season, they switch to piercing gear and then exploit the small pelagics. Then our artisanal fisheries employ just dugout canoes. Some fishers use paddle sails, or others use outboard motors up to 40 horsepower. Now, we have various gears that are used. We have gill nets, piercing nets that we call the Ali Polywacha. Some fishers also target demersals using hooks and lines. And then in our lagoons and estuaries, we also have fishers using cast nets, traps, and then things, other passive gear like that. Now, our small-scale fishery also includes those who fish in our rivers and lakes, but they don't, the bulk of our fish comes from our maritime sector. Now, we also have a female-dominated shellfish fishery in some of our coastal estuaries, where women are shellfish pickers, chiefly the oysters, and then what we know as the volta clam. That's dominated by women. Now, so our small-scale fisheries, the maritime one, gives us almost 70% of our maritime fish catches or landings. And out of these landings, the fish are dominated by 5 species or 4 species, if I should put it that way. The Atlantic chub mackerel, which is Comba coleus, the European anchovy, and then Sardinellus. We have 2 Sardinellus species, the flat and then the round. Now, with this heavy dependence on fish as a source of protein in Ghana, our fish stocks have declined over the past, I should say, 30 to 40 years. And in 2017, it was a disaster. It hit near collapse. And then there had to be urgent management measures that had to be put in place. But what was causing this decline? There was a lot of weak governance and law enforcement, because people could flout the law and get away with it, or pay huge sums of money and just go off the hook. And this was something that made fishers also resort to illegal fishing methods. We've had issues with people using dynamite, or what we call bomb fishing, cyanide, or even mixing powdered detergents with water at sea to make it foam and look frothy, and that sort of is like a fish attracting something. And because of that, there's been a lot of issues in our SSF. And then the other problem is that there was the open access fishery where anyone could just, get the canoe and go out to sea and catch whatever they wanted. So all these also, together with issues of climate change and variability, have affected our catches in Ghana when it comes to the small scale fishery. And of course, we know that due to this, there are going to be conflicts that will arise, because you begin to see that we will not have equity and fairness in the sector. Now, according to AMEAO, conflicts in Ghana's small-scale fisheries can be grouped into 3, where we have conflicts among the fishers themselves, and then between the various fishing fleets, and also between the administrators or government, and then the small-scale fishers. So here we have a picture I just took last week at a community we call Senya Breku, which is a typical coastal community in Ghana. I brought this picture because fishing is not just a vocation, but it's a way of life. And in this photo, you can see that all these people are also dependent on the fishery for their livelihood, right? You have people selling other things, women who are cleaning fish, the fishers themselves, fishmongers, and even little children who are also trying to support the incomes of their families. So there's a lot of multiple or varied interest in our fishery. And because of the open access leading to overcapacity and high fishing effort, among other things, there's been a lot of conflict and injustices. Also because previously, our small-scale fishers were marginalized and were not factored into decision-making. And I'm saying previously. There was also a top-down management approach, which was very reactionary. So it was just that, hey, you don't do this, don't use this gear, we are arresting you, we are doing this without the voices of fishers being heard. So this led to a lot of conflicts for fishing space, conflicts even over how to market fish. We had issues with trawlers intentionally ramming through the nets of artisanal fishers. And this was because the trawlers would come at night into the inshore exclusive zone and then fish in areas that were to be exclusive for just the SSFs to fishing. And so there were a lot of protests, and even there was some politics associated with how chief fishermen are chosen, which I'll come to. And then there have been various conflicts between different sectors or agencies not understanding what the other one is doing or acting in isolation from each other. So what have some of the reactions been historically? There have been altercations, even demonstrations and fisticuffs, flouting of rules and regulations because of that perceived social injustice, right? You asked me not to do this, but that guy is doing it and no one is telling him anything, or he's going away scot-free. So I'm also going to do what I can to also get some fish to take home. There have also been calls for equity and gender balance, as well as for prosecution of all offenders, and for an end to what we call the psycho trade. So the psycho trade is literally transshipment at sea. So what was happening was that the trawlers could not land small size fish. And so if they did get them in their gear, instead of throwing them out, they would rather package them and then sell them or transship them at sea to other artisanal fishers who will go meet them out at sea and then bring that back to port, which was illegal. But the issue was that because of the dwindling catches, it became something like, okay, if they have to throw this at sea, we might as well buy it and come and sell it ashore. But then the trawlers realized that there was now a demand for this fish. And so they modified their trawls and were now actively engaged in mid-water trawling, to the effect that the catch of one trawler, if it's engaged in that illegal activity, would amount to what 450 canoes could get in a day. So when it got to a point where there were intervention measures, maybe in the SSF sector, the fishers said that, okay, until the psycho trade was stopped, they could not be blamed. They, the small scale fishers, could not be blamed for the declining catches. So you can begin to see that there was a lot of conflict at this point. Now, traditionally in Ghana, there's been an age-old fisheries management structure where we had a chief or a chief priest. And by chief, we are talking about traditional leader or the spiritual leader as per African traditional religion. And then we had the chief fisherman who was in charge of all fishes. And then we also have our female fishmonger, we call in the Akan communities Konkohima. They are in charge of all the fishmongers and fish processors at a particular landing beach or site. And then the fishermen literally report or are under the control of the chief fishermen, as well as others involved in fishing. Now, there used to be traditional management measures that were adhered to, typically when there were very few people fishing, when the population was not so high. And these were fishing holidays. In Ghana currently, most fishers don't go to sea either on Tuesday or Thursday, depending on the location. And then in some lagoons and estuaries during yearly festivals, there are seasonal closures for about 2 weeks to a month, which were all traditional conservation methods. There were others like women not being allowed to go to sea to undertake maritime fishing, no sex before, excuse my language, before fishing. And then women in their menstrual period are also typically not allowed to go into coastal water bodies. A restriction on the use of certain gears because some deities did not like those gears, and among other things. And if you were a fisher and you contravened these laws, there were fines, curses, restrictions of access, among other things. But with the advent of industrialization and modernization, and then large population increases in numbers, most of these rules have just been thrown out, right? And people don't respect them anymore.
Jemimah,
Now, formally,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your time is over. If you can just finish in 1 minute or so.
All right. So, yes, I will. So there was this top-down approach, which was not working because fishers were really feeling marginalized, right? And even though there was a co-management approach, it went off to a very slow start because it wasn't backed by enough science, and there was a lot of social injustice. which made fishers agitate and say that they were not going to comply with the laws because their voices hadn't been heard and information was not available to them. So there was a lot of donor-funded intervention, which we have on our screen now, which helped or came to help the government of Ghana come up with the co-management approach where all stakeholders in the fishery sector were involved in decision-making and information dissemination. And then more fishers were represented on decision management platforms. And then there was increased capacity for students, academics, state agencies to bring up more publications and more training. And in short, we moved away from a high sense of injustice to greater justice, as well as support for management decisions. Yes.
Thanks a lot.
So I just want to say that there's more to be done, but Ghana has come a long way and there's so much to be done. So as we keep talking and discussing, we will realize that yes, blue justice is possible and we will get there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Very sorry, Jemimah, but congratulations for your presentation. I would like just to remind you, because as you are not able to be among us, we're expecting that you follow, you monitor, messages that are coming, from.
I will surely do that. I would keep those messages when it's question time and then read them.
Thanks a lot. So please, have the. So I have the obligation just to use my chronometer. If I like that. You do that. Okay, so I will.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Natana. Good afternoon. My name is Almas Mazigo. I'm from Tanzania. And I start where my colleague ended by saying that blue justice is possible, but under certain conditions, and that is through a people-centered fisheries governance. And I want to make a distinction and clarify what do I mean by people-centered governance. Of course, it's not my coining, but it's what the fishermen and fisherwomen told me for the 15 years of engaging with them. They make a distinction between a government-centered fisheries governance and people-centered fisheries governance. A government-centered governance involves the government personnel and promotes the interests of the government. Where the people-centered, the fishermen who are people at the center of all the practice. It is the fishermen themselves, fisherwomen who are involved, and to promote their own interests, including pursuing development outcomes that they value. And we have really agents, organizations which are promoting this kind of people-centered governance to facilitate the pursuit of what small-scale fishers value. Let me start my screen then so that we could move. Chair is not moving. Thank you. So my three messages, which I want to communicate through this talk. The first one is that there are some injustices that small-scale experience, which are produced and perpetuated through local fisheries governance systems, mostly are government-centered. And the second message that I want you to capture is that people-centered governance system promote justice for the diverse groups of small-scale fishers. And I will show how this has happened in the case that I'm going to refer to. And my third and last message will be that supporting and nurturing established people-centered governance system in fisheries rewards significantly. In the case I'm referring to, there are two cases. One is in Ukerewe district along the Lake Victoria, which they practice inland capture fisheries, especially on the Nile perch, Nile tilapia, and the sardines, Chikodaga. And the second case is on Songo Songo, also an island, but this one in the Indian Ocean region, part of Tanzania. And this practice marine culture fisheries, especially on the small marine pelagic daga and octopus. And since 2012, I engaged in the small-scale fisheries. And one of the important questions that we were focusing on is on whether the small-scale fisheries have the potential for wealth creation. So I spent 6 months in the small-scale fisheries in Ukerewe, engaging some different people who engage in small-scale fisheries, asking them whether it is possible to create wealth, become prosperous by engaging in small-scale fisheries. And the answer was positive. Yes, it's possible. How? Because the sector has really opportunities to invest, to work, and any resources that improve the well-being of the people. And therefore, you see that people are investing, are working in fish catching, fish processing, fish trading, fish transporting, making and selling of fish inputs. They invest and they engage in this because they have hope that there is a possibility of making wealth. And therefore, people, men and women, invest and undertake fisheries activities to earn an income and hope to become prosperous. And actually, we have seen, and there are evidence that people who engage in this sector earned income, which they use to pay for their children's education, to buy food and clothes, pay for their health services, improve their homes, build houses, and reinvest in other productive businesses. And if three people are doing so with the hope that they could become prosperous, the question is, have they become prosperous? Do we have an evidence that fishers have become prosperous? Do we have household of the fishermen and fisherwomen that are prosperous? And do we have prosperous community? And the evidence suggests that we have very few fish catchers who have become rich. We have very few fish processors who have become rich, very few fish traders who have become rich, and probably few household and no community of a fishing community has become rich. Then are they poor? The fishermen said, no, they're not poor, but they're constrained to create wealth. They're wealth creators who have been constrained. And that is where the injustice coming that has presented them in that situation. And how have they been constrained? There are many constraining conditions that trap them in a situation of low production, low earning, low savings, and low investment. And small-scale fishers, they told me that we are not poor, we are constrained wealth creators who need help to overcome the conditions that they experience. And these are the form of the injustice that they experience. Who can provide that help? It's everybody, the government, in the market, and the civil society. So what are some of the constraints, conditions, which are part of the injustice that they experience? They say they have been incapacitated in their pursuit of wealth because they receive inadequate extension services, where they could get knowledge and some of the things that would help them address the challenge they face. They have limited access to personal and business loans. Why? Because financial institutions do not fund their business because they consider them too risky, so they're excluded. They also have limited access to insurance services to cover for their life, medical, and business-related risk, like in other sectors. But also they have inadequate fishing, processing, and receiving facilities, the infrastructure injustice. Furthermore, they experience exploitative labor and business relations, whereby they experience unfair prices for their catch, their fish products, labor, and business dealings. And why they all experience this? Because the government is not there to support them. Some of us are not there to support them. The market is not there to help them. The civil society are not there to support, nor make them heard. And therefore, what will change? We only need a different form of governance whereby the fishers, men and women, are at the center of the processes. And we need organizations in the government, in the market, and civil society who could help them solve this problem. And here is an example that I want to share with you, that has really supported the small-scale fishers enact a people-centered governance. And I take the case of Songo Songo, and I want to acknowledge the work which has been done by WWF Tanzania, and somewhere here, where are you, WWF? These people have done a great job to help this community enact, initiate, establish a people-centered governance system. And what does that system do? So since 2008, WWF engaged in series of capacity building workshops to the small-scale fishers to help them really understand and decide the kind of governance they want to put in place to support the initiative of creating wealth through the fisheries. And my research in this community, these people told me, through the series of the workshop, which was done by WWF, they were able to imagine and determine a new governance system in which, one, they have a say on everything. They have a say about their fisheries. They have their right to access and use the marine resources. That every individual has opportunity to pursue a valued livelihood in the fisheries. And a system in which their leaders are accountable to and committed to serving small-scale fishers, because the small-scale fishers are at the center of the system. And that conservation of marine resources is their number one priority. And lastly, that the livelihood of the local people and their development is a priority. And they put on structures. The structures include the General Assembly, in which everything about their fisheries are determined by themselves. And also they have a secretariat who works daily to monitor and oversee the management, and in this case, they choose the octopus fisheries. And what has been the processes then? Since then, these people chose to implement this people-centered governance system on the octopus fisheries, and thereafter they decide on when to close and open the octopus reef. they enact rules and decide on the criteria to access and collect octopus. They approve the use of the revenue collected, and then they do everything that they need to solve the problem that they encounter. And the result of this, they have achieved a lot. And these are some of the statistics of correcting the octopus for their closure that they have been able to do and achieve. And you see now they're able to correct more octopus. They now have the government instruments taking care of them when they do their business and not the other way around. And we, part of the researchers, are also able to go there and enjoy the soup of octopus. And they have all the structures that give everyone an opportunity to engage in the fisheries, to be able to do what they value and earn the income and improve their livelihood. It's still in the process, and we hope we will reach there one day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Katrina, are you ready to proceed?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katrina Hilundwa, and thank you once again for inviting me to be part of this plenary session. So today I'm talking about blue justice for small-scale fisheries, but focusing me more on a need to recognize and promote women leading in blue entrepreneurship. And with this conversation, I'm actually basing it from a BCLME point of view. And BCLME actually it's South Africa, Namibia, and Angola. Just an introduction. Women are actually known as the global backbone of the small-scale fisheries sector, and they are also considered as active agents of the blue economy concept, which actually leads for blue growth. But if we look at how our women are, they are considered poor because their participation along the value chain is restricted or limited to areas that are not of much value. However, if we look at the global numbers, about 90% of the people are employed along the capture fisheries value chain, and they operate as small-scale fishers. And approximately 492 million of these people depend on, or at least on small-scale fishers for their livelihoods, and most of them have, and over 45 million are women who participate in small-scale fisheries, including subsistence purposes. We also have got about 60% of those that are from the African region, and out of the 27% of the total population of SADC depend on small-scale fisheries, and with a value of 0.5 million tons, that is tons from the marine small-scale fisheries, and about 1 million tons from inland fisheries. Now, if you look at the BCLME region, about a total number of, or approximately 150,000 artisanal and small-scale fishers are employed in the sector. And on average, about 500,000 metric tons of fish are harvested every year within the 3 BCLME countries. So when we talk about women that are leading in blue entrepreneurship, we are talking about women who have become independent and resourceful and more visible in the socio-economic fabric of the blue economy. I look at Tani Hilda, one of the ladies that we've worked with in one of our fishing communities in South Africa. She started a cooperative called Vescus Manki, and the cooperative mainly focuses on bringing traditional coastal pantry products that are made in their beautiful kitchens to the South African market. Because it's an alternative livelihood, they sell their products, which are mainly limpet, pickle, or sea lettuce salt, on an online marketplace, which is called the Ebalobi Pantry, which has actually recognized women as leaders and innovators and business women who are trying to nurture their traditional businesses. And then I look at Tani Tusnelda, the lady with the shells, who's from Walvis Bay and involved in a collection of shells, mussels along the beach. As these women, they walk every morning to go collect shells along the beach, and they carry them in bags that are of 20 to 50 kg from the shoreline, and then they process and sell the traditional jewelry to the market. It's actually called the onyoka. And they sell these products either to their families, to their neighbors, or to tourists, or at the open market. And usually, a string of such a jewelry costs about 1.5 USD, and depending on the market, depending on the shell types, they can make up to 400 strings from a bag of 50 or 20 kg. And then in the middle, it's Madame Ernestina, who is actually a president of a fishing cooperative in Benfa, in Angola. And she has decided to come up with, they've actually been throwing away fish cuts and other waste. And she has realized that they are actually throwing down money down the drain. So what they have decided is to make fish meal out of these waste products of the fish, and through this she has actually come to a point whereby she has employed about 10 women within her community, and through this initiative they are actually earning about 40 USD to 60 USD per month from the sales, and these are within the local markets or within the nearby provinces. So now when we talk about blue injustice, we look at the nightmare that women who are trying to be entrepreneurs are facing. Although they are participating and taking up opportunities within the sector, they face blue injustice, which has really become not only a concern for them, but for the whole spectrum of the small-scale fishers. So we have seen and we still foresee their rights and access to fisheries resources and ocean space affected by the new visions of the ocean growth and development. And this mainly focuses on maximizing profits of foreign direct investment, and within the 4 sectors of the blue economy development. And these 4 sectors are mainly fisheries, tourism, transport, mining, etc. So because of these blue economy policies and accompanying changes in regulations and authorities, they exclude them from decision making. They actually also, it has also created inequitable distribution of coastal areas and resources. And in certain situations, they are unable to benefit from the resources that are actually part of their culture or part of them. So so this has become an issue for most of the women who are trying to participate in this area. And with that picture is just a group of ladies from Honor Bay that have been actually trying to write an open letter to the Minister of South Africa so that they can have access to fishing rights, because they formed a cooperative. Until today, they haven't received any rights to harvest any marine resource. So now, why we are trying to promote entrepreneurship and participation along the blue economy value chain is because we have seen the untapped potential within the economy, and especially within the small-scale fishers. So what we are trying to do is, we need to promote entrepreneurial participation along the value chain, which can actually further a holistic approach to social development and inclusion. It would also explore potential innovative initiatives and opportunities for blue growth. So it would also prosper through potential strategic approaches and frameworks if the legal frameworks for blue growth is in an inclusive space with conducive trade and markets, and also if they contribute to blue justice principles. So for us to achieve leaders in blue entrepreneurship, I feel like we need to look at the narrative of social justice. Therefore, for small-scale fishers to manage or to proceed within this system, they need equity, they need access to platforms, they need to participate in decision making, they need platforms where they can actually be able to make as well decisions, dialogues to understand what are the different aspects that are happening within the economy, within their nations or within the marine system. They need to be promoted and recognized as well, and recognize their rights as well within the blue economy. So there should be equitable and transparent rights to access resources as well as space for them. So the way forward is for the blue growth strategy to work, or for us to achieve a sustainable, to achieve sustainability in the frame of blue justice, blue economy. We need to integrate the role of small-scale fishers as a whole in the process. So we shouldn't just look at the system and look at the bigger picture of making profits, but either look at the social issues that govern the small-scale fishers. So thank you for this.
Thanks a lot, Katrina, for your good presentation, and in particular for having done it, in less than 10 minutes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Wilmien Wicomb. I'm an attorney at the Legal Resources Centre, and I don't have a presentation, so you don't have to stare at the screen. I was asked by Muniba to speak today about two cases, very significant cases brought by small-scale fishers in South Africa over the last year. In these cases, small-scale fishing communities, first on the wild coast of South Africa and then on the west coast, took on corporate giants and won. The first was the wild coast communities who took on the multinational oil giant Shell, and not much later, the west coast communities took on Australian company Searcher, who has Shell and Total and others as their clients. And both Shell and Searcher wanted to do seismic surveys off the coastline of South Africa to look for oil and or gas. And the fishers wouldn't have it. Before I tell you about those cases, I want to say something, however, about the many cases in the small-scale sector in South Africa over the last almost 20 years that led up to the Shell and Searcher cases and really made those cases possible. Why do I say that? As a lawyer, you would know that our job is to listen to people's stories and their grievances and try and translate that into a legal complaint. It's not always possible, but that's what we try. As a human rights lawyer, as I am, it's even more specific. We listen to people's stories and grievances, and we try and translate that into infringements of rights, right? Of fundamental human rights. Now, where do we find these rights? So not anything that feels like a right is a right in law, or a human right at least. So in South Africa, we're lucky. We have in our constitution quite a number of socioeconomic rights entrenched in that constitution. And so if you can say that whatever grievance you have is a violation of your human right, then there may well be a case. But all of us in Africa have the rights contained in the African Charter, and of course we have international instruments. So there are many places where we can find these human rights. And so there are two reasons why this is important, I think, this history that led up to the Shell and Searcher cases. The one is that, of course, if you argue in court that fishers saw their rights violated, you may get a judge to write a good judgment confirming that. And then you have law that comes from a judgment. But you're not always that lucky. Very often a case settles or the judge doesn't confirm the rights that you argued, even though they may have been convinced by it. But that doesn't mean that that process of developing rights is useless. What it does is it means that between lawyers and communities, you develop a shared language of what it is we're actually talking about here when we talk about the everyday violations, the everyday experiences. What are those really in terms of human rights and the violation of human rights? And I'm very quickly going to try and illustrate that to you. So this morning you heard about the Kenneth George case, which was really the start of small-scale fishing in a legal framework in South Africa post-constitutionally. So this is the case which led to the establishment of small-scale fishing sector. So the LRC was approached by these small-scale fishers saying that the legal framework was excluding them and they wanted to fish. And at the time, the lawyers translated that into the violation of 3 rights. The first was the right to food, and I think we could easily show that small-scale fishing was central to the livelihoods, to the actual food on the table of so many coastal communities. Secondly, an interesting one, in our constitution, you have something called freedom of trade, or the right to choose your work. And what the lawyers heard was fishers saying, all we want to do is fish, not only because it feeds us, because this is who we are. And they translated that into this right of choosing your trade. They must, within limits, have the right to do what they want to do. And the third right, of course, was the right to equality, the right to not be discriminated against. And the argument was made that, the way your legal framework is set up is there to cater for commercial fisheries, for a completely different kind of sector, and that actively discriminates against us, right? So those were the 3 rights used at the time. In the years after that, as the small-scale fishing sector developed and people started exercising these rights, there were a number of battles with marine protected areas in South Africa, and I should say these are certainly ongoing. But some of those went to court, and that again provided an opportunity to kind of further develop this language of rights on behalf of fishers. So again, in one case, Langebaan, and Celine is here today, in the Langebaan MPA, those fishers argued successfully that they were being discriminated against as small-scale fishers who fish to feed themselves. They were treated unequally to recreational fishers who had extraordinary access to use the MPA. And it was a successful argument, and it again solidified this idea that small-scale fishing communities must be treated equally, and in fact, we developed that argument over time to say, must in fact have preferential treatment, because there will only be equality between small-scale fishers, recreational fishers, commercial fishers, if you make up for the generations of lost time. In that same Langebaan case, we also started rethinking about this idea of fishers expressing that fishing is in their blood, fishing is what they want to do, fishing is central to the identity of our communities, we don't want to do anything else, this is who we are. And we rethought that not as the right to freedom of trade, but the right to culture. This right had by then been developed also in South Africa, and we understood that really that is the right that people are asserting. It's our identity. And that if you take that away, then that is an infringement of the right to culture. Soon thereafter, the people from Dwesakwebe, another MPA in the Eastern Cape, they, after being persecuted and prosecuted for fishing in the marine protected area. 3 very brave fishers who were charged criminally for attempting to fish in a marine protected area went to court and said this extraordinary thing. They said, yes, we were trying to fish in the marine protected area, and yes, the law that Parliament wrote does not allow us to do that. And yes, the minister has never given us a permit to fish there. But we have customary rights, like people in Australia, Canada, South Pacific, many other countries where courts have recognized that customary rights to fish is a legal right. And our constitution recognizes customary law. And for that reason, when we went to fish, the 3 fishers said we did so lawfully because we were acting in terms of our customary law. It was a very long battle for almost 10 years and eventually confirmed by the Supreme Court of Appeal. That doesn't mean everyone can just go and fish, which was immediately the knee-jerk response, but an extraordinarily important judgment all the same. And of course, what it did was it absolutely solidified this idea that fishing is central to culture. So not only to culture as identity and a means and a community's social fabric, but also as the customary rights and a recognition of the customary system of certain fishing communities. So when in November last year, 27th of November last year, I got a phone call to say that fishers on the Wild Coast saw on Facebook that Shell was about to start blasting the ocean right off their coastline to look for oil and gas. We were able to very quickly put together a court case, because it had to be done very quickly, in order to try and stop Shell. And I think it's important to note that we, before the small-scale communities went to court to stop Shell, another group went to court to try and do it. They weren't small-scale fishing communities. Some of them were fishers and environmental groups, and they said, well, rightfully, that they had environmental rights that stood to be violated, and they had the right to due process. But the court threw that out. Weeks later, the small-scale fishers came to court, and after 20 years, they knew exactly what rights were being violated on their behalf. Yes, the right to environment, the same as every other South African. Yes, the right to due process, but also the right to their culture, also the right to food, also the right to equality. And in the face of those extraordinary, strong arguments around fundamental rights being violated, the court stopped Shell from going ahead with their seismic survey, despite the fact that Shell told the court they stand to lose hundreds of millions of rands. The court said, I can't take that seriously in the face of the violation of such fundamental constitutional rights. Soon thereafter, Christian Adams, sitting over there, and others contacted us. I mean, it was weeks later, it was very early in January, because we heard that Searcher, an Australian company, was about to do exactly the same thing on the west coast of South Africa. And in the same way, the West Coast communities stopped Searcher successfully based on these fundamental rights that they had developed. I just want to say one thing, however, I want to add one thing before I finish on the Searcher case, which I personally have found one of the highlights of my career. We often talk about the importance of local knowledge, and we've heard it all day today. And very often we say local knowledge, and we are in favor of local knowledge, but when it comes down to it, we really struggle not to trust the scientists. So in the Searcher case, this searcher had massive environmental reports from scientists. They were weak, but they were long, talking about the possible impact on fisheries. Of course, they didn't understand small-scale fisheries, so they didn't even know that they would be impacted. But what emerged was this crucial species called snook, which is the central species for communities up and down the West Coast. And searchers said, we won't get in the way of the snook. Snook, we know this is what the scientists say, this is how snook travels. And we, I took statements from Christian and other fishers up and down the coast, many of them here today, and they kept explaining how the snook runs, and it kept bugging us because it didn't make sense in comparison to what the scientists were saying. And we didn't quite know how to use it in the court case against searcher. And lo and behold, shortly before our papers were finally filed, we came upon, a scientist came upon a study about snook, by far the most recent study about snook, and really the first time that any scientist had gone and tagged snook and really tried to understand how snook moves. And I quietly think it's because snook is not seen as a high-value species, so no one ever bothered to really understand snook. And would you believe it? This scientist proved that everything our fishers had been saying was true.
Thank you.
And to my mind, that was the absolute key to why we won that court case. And even halfway through, they offered to stay 90 kilometers or something off the coast. And our fishers could still, they knew what was happening where searcher wanted to go. And that, that was really why we won that case. I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I thank you for your presentation. So now may I invite Svein and Shehu for feedback, one after another, or together if you want. It's up to you.
Good. Well, it's after lunch, and I'm sure people are awake. So let me just make this short presentation within the issue of the blue justice. Now, we have all heard all the time that the small-scale fisheries have a lot of issues around the world. I want to ask this question, particularly for all of us, that we have lived the world, and then we have seen the impact of the consequences of some of our actions, which are largely injustice to the small-scale fisheries. Why do we continue, or do we still want to continue, given the fact that we now know that the small-scale fisheries is very valuable in the world of TPTI, too big to ignore? Our decisions to ignore the small-scale fisheries simply means decision for humanity to get destroyed. So my presentation is just to say the small-scale fisheries is not saying that they want to take over all the space. It is about allowing the small-scale fisheries to function within the space. And if we function within the space, all of what my colleagues have said today, all of us will be happier. The small-scale fisheries represents culture. Are we going to be happy that we are living in a world
where we destroy the culture of our people. When your children and children to come ask about daddy, mommy, what is the way of life of my grandparents? Are we going to continue to destroy the world because we just see everything in dollars or in euros or in naira or in rands? The small-scale fisheries is not saying that we should not do nature for service. But what the small-scale fisheries is saying is that this still must be done so that the keeper of the water system can also live. Yes, the argument is it is always a common pool resource. It's not meant for the fishers alone, we know. It is also meant for electricity, we know. It is meant to increase economic value, we know. But what we are saying is this: we must be able to shift within nature. Nature itself has a limit to which you want to disturb it. If we plan deliberately to ensure that the small-scale fisheries, as a keeper of nature, because they must keep the nature. The small-scale fisheries also, as the keeper of service, will allow us to do whatever we want to do. And finally, the small-scale fishery as culture will allow us to practice the culture. And the important culture is the culture of ensuring that all species, including human, must live for the next generation. Thank you.
So Ben, you have something to say, please.
Aliou started to say that the blue justice concept represent a counter narrative to the blue economy. And it was in that context that the concept was introduced. And yet we know that there was always injustices committed to people in small-scale fisheries. It's not a new phenomenon, but the blue economy raises some new issues, some new challenges that we need to discuss. I'm always fascinated by case studies like we heard today, rich case studies. They help us to situate our arguments, avoid that our discourse is only in the abstract, but we have some concrete examples to show. The description itself is important, and when I listen to them, I'm fascinated by the diversity of situations in which small-scale fisheries find themselves in. But when I listen to case study, I am also listening to listening whether there is an argument that can be drawn from the description. Sometimes the presenter makes that argument itself. Sometimes, in other situations, it is the person who listens who has to ask him or herself, what did I learn from this case study beyond the descriptive part of the paper? There was a lot of, I think, general lessons to be taken out from these case studies, and I also thought there was a lot of fascinating arguments. Jemimah talk about conflict. which is, of course, to be expected in the blue economy, and the injustice and the power you need to come out as winners of these conflicts. And it's not sure that the winners will be small-scale fisheries unless certain conditions are established, like some that also Almas talked about. We do need good examples of empowerment, especially about women's empowerment. When I'm asked about what is the key to addressing the issues of small-scale fisheries, what is the key that could make them be more sustainable? And over the years, I've been increasingly convinced that the answer to that question is women. I think, and I was even more convinced when I heard that, listened to what happened yesterday and some of these arguments. There is something that women has that is so important. And women are the one who provide that link to communities. And unless yet you're able to sustain communities, you are not able to sustain small-scale fisheries. This is a long argument, and I cannot go into it here, but I will maintain that the role of women, gender relations, the empowerment of women is essential to small-scale fisheries survival. Almas raised the question that, or the argument that blue justice is possible, but only under certain conditions, and we need to reflect on what these conditions are. He said that it must be people-centered. Blue justice must be people-centered, and the question is, what does that mean? Do we have good example of people-centered initiatives that creates the balance or a better balance of power so that small-scale fisheries do not come out as losers in the blue economy, which is not only likely, but something we see many examples of around the world, and I believe also the case here in South Africa. He argued that the SSF guidelines have the potential for wealth creation, and I think that's an important argument, but also under those conditions, that we will also ask ourselves under what conditions would that be possible? Will the blue economy enhance those, improve those conditions, or would they make them worse? Many talk about a new form of governance, and there is no question that this is important. We therefore need local communities to organize themselves. Small-scale fisheries need to be organized, and that's one way to build power in small-scale fisheries. I was intrigued by the presentation from Angola, where Katrina talked about women leading in entrepreneurship, and I think that's an argument about along those lines. Is also an argument why women play such an important role, and that not just in what is called, we would think of as private entrepreneurship, creating products, businesses, etc., but also in so-called social entrepreneurship, and there's a big literature on that concept. And that means initiatives that is not just for the family, but for the community. And we have examples where women have actually taken that leadership. But she also talked about women's, she used the word, the nightmare of women's entrepreneurship. The question is, what is that about? Who are those that are creating that nightmare? And let me just say, because I have written about it, is that one of the reasons for women's nightmare is in entrepreneurship is not just the government, but it also the menfolk in their own families and their communities that do not necessarily like the changing gender roles that follows in the wake of social entrepreneurship. So that is also an issue to discuss. It is about rights, and it's about recognizing that that there are things that must be solved legally. And if people ask me, what's the second thing you would recommend to correct these inequities in small-scale fisheries, is implement the small-scale fisheries guidelines, because many of the things that we argue has already been accepted. It is now like breaking in open doors. Now it's a question of implementing them, and we have to make sure that our governments do that, because they have promised that they will. Thank you.
Thank you. Svein. So now I think we have the floor is can be open for question. Yes, it will be the first, but I would like just to remind the following. We expect from interveners or those who are going to intervene, in addition to some story, question, and all, also to make some proposal, because we would like at the end of this Congress, we plan to have, specific to our session, to have an agenda, because we can't meet here, just talk formally, about this injustice, this blue justice, all these issue challenges, faced by fishers, without having, when we leave, a tentative agenda, plan of action, or, So, just a reminder, please. Moniba, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Is the mic working? Is it on now? Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for really fascinating presentations. It's really great how the concept evolved. Wilmien, I wanted to ask you a question directly. On the one hand, I feel in South Africa, our communities are over-researched, and they feel that they're over-researched. And on the other hand, I also feel that we also need to move beyond confrontation in a way of litigation. And I also want us to start thinking about how do we move beyond litigation and just not as a first resort, what are the other options that are in place and available to small-scale fishers in South Africa? For me, that is an important part of looking at how do we achieve blue justice for them. Thank you.
Do I speak here? Does this work? Okay. Thank you, Moniba. I mean, I agree with you completely. Litigation is always the last resort. Even all the cases that I mentioned, it was after every other option had failed. And litigation is the last resort, not only for the reason that you mentioned, which is one of, that you create or it's a conflict situation. It's a combative situation, but it's also a last resort because litigation is very, very ineffective in changing the world or changing people's lives. Litigation, does something very high level, but it really does in itself. Litigation in itself really does anything to change circumstances on the ground, and therefore I agree with you, it must always be the very last resort. So where to next? I do think it is a in South Africa, which is the only place where I really have experience of this, and we have people from the department here, but I do feel like over the last 15 years, not only in this sector, but across the board, the relationship between civil society and the state is almost completely broken down, which I think is tragic. I don't think that is a good situation at all. And I don't know how we get past that, but I think it's a priority that we do. So that's the one thing. The other thing is to say that I think by far the most important thing in South Africa, and I imagine hearing from the other presentations everywhere, is to try and strengthen community capacity, organization, resilience to take on the multiple threats that are coming at them from all angles. And my concern is in South Africa that the way small-scale communities have been recognized and organized in law is this strange combination of, on the one hand, fairly micromanagement, so they can almost take no decisions by themselves or decide their own constitution or recognize fissures in their own community. So extremely top down, but at the same time, then absolutely no support whatsoever to fulfill the enormous functions that are now being placed on them, which I just think really weakens communities immensely. And, you know, way more effort should go into fixing that than into litigation. I agree with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead. Your name, please.
My name is Winfried Jemimah, Winfried from Tanzania. I was very much impressed by the. I was really impressed by our lawyer from South Africa. I think that lady over there. Now, and it appears that the pillars of the state in South Africa are well organized in terms of parliament, probably, judiciary, and the parliament. Now, I would just like to have his views in a state where the judiciary is not really free. It could be that it is the government which appoints the judiciary. In this case, what would you advise in the absence of a free judiciary? Thank you.
Can you answer, please? Yeah. Yes, okay.
Let me add this. Okay. My name is Ahmed Khan. I'm from the African Development Bank Group based in Abidjan. Thanks to the panel for the interesting narratives, and of course to the discussants for the insights. I'm trying to think of this from a solution-oriented perspective. Often we tend to hear too many of the problems. We don't get to hear about models of good governance or what has worked where and how we can replicate those. In most of the work we do at the bank, we do have programs in place that deals with issues around inclusion, issues around social and environmental safeguards, and we actually often emphasize on grievance redress mechanism. These are tools that communities can use. We do have a disclosure policy where all projects are disclosed to see whether people have any issues with what is being proposed as interventions. I'm also sure there are examples and good practices of co-management models or tools that could be useful to deal with inclusion. And I think the continent has some good examples. We have also often heard about marine spatial planning. These are tools that sometimes reconcile multiple user needs. So the question for me is really, to what extent are our environmental protection agencies capable of dealing with justice issues? How can they be somehow improve in terms of dealing with issues that are not within their mandates? That's the first one. The second one is, how can we adequately equip departments that deals with fisheries, for instance, that don't have the tools to deal with justice issues? So those are my two inputs. Thank you.
Okay, I assume that this Ahmed's question are for our jurists. No, you can react because we have two questions now. Can you answer please to this?
Sure. I'll answer the first one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question was around what to do in countries where it might be more difficult to use the courts to protect fishing rights. And of course, so I also work a lot in land, and we have the same thing there, and the same question always arises from other countries. So a couple of things to say about that. One, as I've already said in response to Professor Isaacs, don't for a moment think the courts, if you have good courts, then everything is perfect and solved. It's not. It's just one weapon in a big a bunch of weapons, a big armor. And yeah, I do think that we should try and bring these kinds of cases in other countries, because I don't think we assume that they won't work, and then we don't bring them, or not at least as that I'm aware of. And I think that it's something that we should look at working together with. So much of the work of developing some of these cases done here may well assist similar cases happening in other countries. And I think we should at least try it. And if it fails, as you predict, which may well be true, there are always other avenues to go to, beyond the borders of your own country. So I wouldn't dismiss it. And I think it's an important thing to talk about, whether it is something that we can assist each other across boundaries. However, I suppose far more important, I think, is solidarity between communities across boundaries. So to develop, strengthening our communities from the bottom up, with making connections with communities that have struggled and took on massive companies and won, even though it may be in a different way. And then the other thing that often strikes me is that in many other countries on the continent, there are fairly strong local institutions such as district committees, land committees and so on at local level. We don't have that in South Africa at all. It's incredibly centralized and high level in South Africa, our interaction with government. And so there we're at a big disadvantage. And I do think that there are a lot of lessons that we can learn, and there are a lot of creative ways that one can engage those much more local institutions that you often have on the continent outside of South Africa. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, we want to add something?
Yes, the issue of the need to change the strategies, and particularly the cool question, what are the ministries or government agencies doing when these issues of injustice steer the fishery community? From my experience with the Nigerian system, the question has always been that this ministry, being government agencies, has their problems that has bottled down them or put them down, that they do not understand what, or are just incapable of making any interventions on ground in the fisheries. And sometimes this is because they themselves are suffering from the governance mechanisms that is around in this context. Take, for example, the corporation. If you take a case to the ministry and complain, the ministry will tell you sometimes they don't even have control over what happens in the waterfronts. It's not in their purview to take some of these complaints. So you see that these complaints are just taken as just other economic issues because of the low priority small-scale fisheries are given. So not until funders, development agencies also take into the cognizance of ensuring that some of these Department of Fisheries, or whatever the name is, are truly free from the bureaucratic system and are also able to react to complaints from the fishery community, then that is when some of these issues can be solved. And in many instances too, you'll find out that issues of trade and issues of foreign exchange, government places more priority on this. So if the priority of the government is about what comes in, the dollar, then it really may matter not. Whatever the complaints from whoever is coming up, feeling some element of injustice. Okay, I take the issue of oil pollution in Nigeria. If you look at the way the whole system is set up, a lot of, even when the impact assessment has been done, and sometimes you do not even take into cognizance the value, what is the value in terms of the physical product fish, and then what of the physical other valuations that need to be taken into cognizance about displacement, about other issues. So it is always tough to for the fishing community, because they have not been involved from the beginning of the whole process. They are not involved, and even if you look at the issue of the impact assessment reports, the question is, which are these communities strongly empowered to fight for their rights, given that at the end of the day, the system, the political, the court system, they will say grant slowly but surely, but it's usually over a long period of time, and no matter the restitution, no matter the cleanup and all of these, it does not solve the problem. And this is why it will seem that the fishers are always complaining. So I agree that the fishing communities, or as academics, or as those in the arena working for small-scale fisheries, need to change our strategy. We need to do more of policy advocacy. We need to involve those who are at the top. We need to take the advocacy to them, to let them know that, look, we need to be considered, or that the issue of small-scale fisheries should be given a priority. instead of the low-level priority where you have make us reactive all the time and complainants all the time. But if in the beginning of the whole process, the banks insist that the community must be involved, I think the process will become less unjust and the reactionary approach become less. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shehu. I don't want that we forget Jemimah, our co-chair. She might have some question because she's tracking, the question online that came online. So if you agree, I think it should be great to alternate, meaning to give her the floor if she has some question, and she just say to whom this question is, or they can answer. So go ahead, Jemimah, you have the floor. And before I would like also to tell participants that I'm expecting myself, I'm very concerned about the responsibility also of community and of fish workers social movement, fish workers, organization in this process. Because it looks like, we are all concerned, we all notice that there are injustice at different levels. But until now, we have been talking about, the fact is that, the law, is not, meaning, justice is not applied as it should be done. The government, responsibility has been denounced. But because I'm surprised that it doesn't, evolve, quickly and in a very positive way, given the fact that in our countries, in particular in West Africa, all the population in Senegal, for example, all the Senegal population should be concerned about, this problem, because none of the Senegalese can't stop eating fish, for 2 days. So with regard to the role of fish, in our diet, cultural, value, it's consumed daily speaking. Normally, it should have some, positive response. Fishers should have positive response, when they just address, some issues, connected to blue justice. So it should be great it should be important to know why it doesn't, it doesn't. They don't move forward. So Jemimah, you have the floor. Please,
okay, thank you very much. So I have a few comments and a few answers and a few questions, but I'll make it quick. So I would first want to say that all the points we've raised so far are very valid. And there was a question about what happens when the state institutions are not directly visible on the ground. And one way we can solve that is if we are able to strengthen our fisher associations in the various communities. Because, for example, at the beginning of the co-management implementation strategy in Ghana, yes, fishers were very, very reactionary. And then when they got to realize that, no, with increased information dissemination, it was really important to go by the sound fisheries management measures. What happened was that the fishers themselves were now coming together to report even things that their own colleagues were doing wrong at the landing beaches. And with donor-funded interventions, they were also able to take photos at sea. For example, if a trawler was committing an infraction, the opportunity was now given that they could, if possible, take the details or just get the location of wherever that vessel was. And if the information was forwarded, something would be done about it. So I think that sometimes if we cannot have the actors directly on the field, if we empower the various local fisheries units, and they also realize that indeed their voices matter, they will begin to own more of the management at the local level instead of waiting or folding their arms for the usual top-down management approach to come in. So at this point, I also want to just throw this back to the audience and invite a few comments or inputs. What do we think can be done when it comes to maybe issues of ensuring that with declines in catches, our small-scale fishers who see fishing as a way of life will still be able to make a realistic living and not just be left hanging? It's something I want to throw back to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jemimah. So if you want, we can take a raise his hand there. No question, no more question? Sorry. Yes.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Christian Adams, and I'm a small-scale fisher from South Africa. And I have a question to our colleague from Tanzania in relation to blue justice, and how is it possible that Total can continue with the East Africa crude oil pipeline when nothing about the pipeline is just for either for both inland and coastal communities and also from other countries as well? And then how will the effects that it will be having on the octopus fishing that we've just currently seen being promoted in the manner in which it is? And then just another question that we have is that, but not just for Tanzania, the definition for offshore in our respective countries, especially our coastal countries that we have, how does our respective countries define offshore? And how can we get a continental definition for offshore pertaining to the African continent? Then I have a proposal to make, is that we look at establishing an exclusive small-scale fishery zone along the entire coastline of Africa, inclusive of the islands of Africa as well. So that we have a buffer zone around the entire continent. And as to how we take that up with the AU-IBA or the AU, or what, how do we get support from researchers, academics, all the organizations that are here in order to support such a proposal like that? Because we've heard many story about the transgressions being done and all of these things, and it's the very same people that are doing these transgressions. It's just in different countries that they are doing it, whether it be in South Africa, whether it be in Port Harcourt in Nigeria, whether it be Dar es Salaam, or wherever it is. It's the same people that's doing these translations. So how is it possible that we as a continent allow these people to continue to transgress in our waters, on our continent, and in our communities in the manner in which they are doing it, and we are not doing anything about it, not collectively? We are trying it on our individual countries, but with our corrupt governments that we have currently performing under what is called continuing with what is called after world oppression under colonialism, and in our case apartheid. They are now seated with what I call corruptcracy. It's not democracy. It's corruptcracy, because this is the only thing that is being practiced in the majority of our countries. So, not taking away from the proposals that I've made regarding the exclusive small-scale fishery zone, and also the definition of offshore, because many of the organizations, and especially environmental organizations, in the case of South Africa, the WWF supporting the definition described by our department, whereby the department defines offshore by the type of the gear that the West Coast rock lobster industry uses. And these things favor the industry, and yet we have the WWF as part of a management group that doesn't speak to these issues in the case of South Africa, that is. So I would like us to come up with a solution that would be suited for all of us as Africans. And Bon après-midi to all the great speakers here. We've been neglecting you a lot, and our apologies for the lack of, or at least for me as a small-scale fisher, my apologies for the lack of direct translation from English to Chinese. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to react to Jemimah. I think made a comment, but she has a question. Ratana? Ratana, you want to react or? No? Yes, we are, yeah, I know. We'll finish in it's 15 past 3, no problem. I have a. So, any reaction to Jemimah's or the last intervener who want to? Go ahead.
Hello. Regarding to your question, Tanzania, I think you are referring to the project from Uganda all the way to Tanga and then abroad. You know, the challenge, they are always the same. You have experts who do impact assessment and they say everything is okay. And the government will always not promote its own interests. So this takes us back to what I said before. It's only when the government is part and takes seriously the interests of the small scale fishers, then I think the other things could be considered. But in this context, the government is also promoting its own interests and pursuing them so strongly. And that makes it difficult for some other people and some other organizations to intervene. But also, on what basis do you base? For example, you have all these impact assessment done by our experts, supported by the law, and they say everything's gonna be okay. So it's only when you establish the counter to that that you are able to take it probably to the court. And guess what? The court, Zaure has already said, appointed is not free, serving the interests of the government. It takes us back. So that is the challenge, but we are here. We still have to pursue it in different ways, and hopefully one day things will be different. And that is the hope we have, the hope for true justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have now 7 minutes left, and we need at the end around 2 minutes just to transmit this, thing to Too Big to Ignore. It's from Senegal, meanings for we have 5 minutes left for additional question if you have. You introduce yourself, please. Jemimah.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry, first of all, to say that I am a French-speaking. I'm coming from a French-speaking country, but working for FAO. Now, I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. So I cannot come here, listen everybody, without saying that in Africa, what we need in the legal perspective is to establish, to strengthen capacities of the magistrates, because the fisheries sector is a particular sector. We have some magistrates who are not specialized on international law, who are not specialized on fisheries law. So to make justice to people, you need to understand what is fisheries. I think that's a case that has been raised by our colleagues here, the lawyer from South Africa, is a specific case. If you go around, I know West Africa because I was the agent of 7 countries before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. And The problem is in West Africa, I don't know the other countries, we need to strengthen capacities of magistrates, to know exactly what is fisheries. Because you, as a small-scale fishers, if you go to the tribunal, if you go to the court and said, I have some problem, I have some injustice, what to do? The magistrate need to understand your problem. If they don't understand the problem, they cannot make justice. I think that what I would like to suggest is we have some partners here, is to help African states at the national level to strengthen our capacity to our magistrates first, and to establish maritime court, specialized maritime court. Because I don't know if in South Africa you have this, but in West Africa we don't have specialized maritime court. This maritime specialized court will be competent for all maritime issues, including fisheries, maritime transport, offshore exploration, offshore exploitation. This is what I would like to suggest to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jemimah. We have 1 minute left because it's 3 minutes, and I need 2 minutes to just, transmit this to be ignored. Is there any other question or comment in 1 minute, please? Because Ratana, our co-president and president of the organizing committee say, okay, you can be late, not too much, but maybe 1 minute or two like I did, but we have to finish on time. You told that, no? Okay, is it 1 minute because we, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm inspired by the establishment of the rights, like the case itself, but it's a cooperate against people. Now, when such establishment is done, because those things can be done up by maybe an individual infringing other individuals' rights. Now, whose responsibility is it after those rights are established? If somebody, let's say, another fisher is using small nets, then whose responsibility is it? Is it the government? Is it the society, or is an individual who can sue the malpractice done by another one who's infringing the rights? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Is it a comment or a question?
I think it's a question.
It's a question to South Africa.
Yes.
Yes.
Just very quickly, so it depends it would depend on your country. So in South Africa, we have very broad standing laws. So normally the person whose right is infringed must go to court. So because you must be able to show that you have standing in front of the court, so it must be your right if your right is infringed. But in South Africa, we have very broad standing laws. So anyone can almost go in the public interest. That's for going to court, but the state is actually the one that should see that these things don't go to court. The state has the power to regulate, so it shouldn't even reach the court. The state is the responsible one, but that doesn't happen.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to congratulate Jemimah, who have been co-chairing this session with me in collaboration with all the other members of the organizing committee. And she was supposed to be here, but for some, visa issue, so she didn't join us. Thanks a lot, Jemimah. Congratulations. I'm sure next time we'll meet. Okay.
Definitely. Thank you.
And,
thank you, everyone.
I would like to see this opportunity to give this I don't know, this book to give it. It's a book written in French, but I'm sure, given the great interest to be ignored, even the great interest to be to know is giving to small scale fishery. I think that it will be enough for you just to see the picture, in order to understand what is expressed here. And in particular, with regard to a slogan, a motto, you have too big to ignore. So with great pleasure, I would like to transmit this book. I just contribute, it's about a story, and it's not TD, transdisciplinary approach, but it's multi, because many people from many disciplines contributed. I have a small, words inside written by myself, and it's really a pleasure, as you haven't yet visited us, on behalf of the Ignore, to offer this book to your great institution.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for making possible my participation here.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me take this opportunity to say also a couple of words, because you did a great job at telling people that we are trying to come up with actions or way forward, some kind of collaboration, and we heard a lot of good comments today, especially in this session, about what kind of things we can think of together, including some of the suggestions by our official colleague here, Christian. So it's something to continue to think about. I don't think we can do all in one session. We got a lot of great comments and interventions from our speakers and discussants. So there will be time to just come back together and continue with the conversation. For instance, now we're going to break for half an hour to go and get ready for the concurrent sessions. You all know where you want to go. If you want to stay in Atlantic 1 and 2, it will be this area. If you are interested in the other two sessions, you go to the courtyard. There's also virtual session. That means that you can just be anywhere and just join online. But please come back. Those sessions will start at 3:45. Please come back at 5:30, okay? Because that will be when we have another hour and a half to talk to the policy people, to talk to various perspectives about what we need to do. So some of the questions that you just heard and the comments can come back and address them here. So thanks again, the chair of the session and all the speakers, discussants, and everyone. And we'll see you back here at 5:30.
Okay. Thank you.